I never thought loneliness could lead me here. Sharing a bed with him, my stepnephew, as the storm raged outside. The power was out, the house plunged into shadows, and every breath he took seemed to echo in the silence. When his hand brushed against mine, I should have pulled away. But I didn't. And as his eyes met mine, I knew this night would change everything. I wasn't always this lonely. Once upon a time, my life was full, family gatherings, laughter, and a marriage I thought would last forever. But life has a cruel way of unraveling dreams. After my divorce, the silence in my house became both a comfort and a curse. Nights were the hardest, especially when the rain poured down like it did that night. I had settled into a routine of solitude, books, wine, and reruns of old TV shows. It was safe, predictable, and most importantly, it kept me from feeling too much. I told myself I didn't need anyone. Not anymore. But when Ryder showed up at my door, drenched from the storm, I felt something stir inside me, something I thought had died long ago. Ryder wasn't my blood relative. He was my ex-husband's nephew, a boy I had only seen at family events and holiday dinners. Except he wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man, tall, lean, and confident in a way that made me feel small and unsure of myself. When I opened the door, his face lit up with relief. "Aunt Maggie," he said, shivering from the cold. "My car broke down, and your place was the closest." I let him in without hesitation, offering him a towel and dry clothes. He apologized for the inconvenience, but the truth was I didn't mind. In fact, I welcomed the company. We sat by the fireplace, sipping tea and talking like old friends. He told me about his struggles, work stress, broken relationships, and the pressure to figure out his future. His honesty caught me off guard. It had been years since anyone had opened up to me like that, and before I knew it, I found myself laughing, sharing my own stories and forgetting, if only for a moment, how empty my life had become. But then the lights went out, and we were left in near darkness, save for the soft glow of the fire. That's when things shifted. The air grew heavier, and the space between us seemed smaller. When Ryder asked, "Where should I sleep?" my heart skipped a beat. And when I offered him a place beside me in my bed, I told myself it was innocent. Practical. But deep down I knew better. The bed felt too small. I lay on one side, my body stiff, trying to convince myself this was just a temporary arrangement, a kindness for someone in need. Ryder lay on the other side, close enough that I could hear his steady breathing. But I wasn't calm. Not even close. The storm outside raged on, rattling the windows and drowning out the thoughts I was trying so desperately to suppress. I told myself I was overthinking it, reading too much into innocent gestures. But the way his arm brushed against mine as he shifted made my breath catch. I forced myself to stay still, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Why was my heart pounding like this? Why did I suddenly feel hyper-aware of him? The rise and fall of his chest, the faint scent of soap and rain lingering on his skin. "Are you awake?" His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Yeah," I whispered back, my throat dry. He turned toward me. I didn't have to look to know his eyes were on me. I could feel it. The weight of his gaze sent a shiver down my spine. "I can move to the couch if this is weird," he said, his voice low. "No," I said quickly, too quickly. "It's fine. Really." The words hung between us, heavy and fragile. He didn't say anything after that, but I could feel the tension building, thickening the air until it was almost suffocating. Minutes stretched into hours, and sleep refused to come. Every time he shifted, every brush of the blankets sent a jolt through me. It was ridiculous. I was acting like a nervous teenager instead of a grown woman who should have known better. But knowing better didn't stop me from noticing the way his breath hitched when our arms accidentally touched again. It didn't stop my pulse from quickening or the heat creeping up my neck. And then, just when I thought the storm inside me might finally settle, Ryder spoke again. "Thanks for letting me stay," he said softly. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't answered the door." His words were innocent, but the way he said them, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place, made my stomach tighten. "You don't have to thank me," I replied, forcing a smile he couldn't even see in the dark. But as the words left my mouth, I realized it wasn't gratitude I heard in his voice. It was something else entirely, something unspoken but undeniable. The next morning didn't feel any easier. I stood in the kitchen, stirring a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking, trying to push the night's thoughts out of my mind. But then Ryder walked in, his hair damp from a shower, wearing the sweatshirt and sweatpants I'd lent him. He looked different in the light, more relaxed, more confident. And yet, there was something vulnerable in the way he smiled at me. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. He didn't seem to notice. Instead, he leaned casually against the counter, his eyes meeting mine. "You didn't have to make coffee," he said. "It's just a habit," I replied, my hands trembling slightly as I set the mug down. I felt his gaze linger on me, and when he reached past me to grab the sugar, his arm brushed against mine. It was such a simple touch, so casual, but it felt like a spark igniting something I'd been trying to smother. He noticed it too. I saw it in the way his eyes lingered, in the way his fingers brushed against mine just a little longer than necessary. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself I was imagining it. But deep down I knew better. The day dragged on, but the tension never eased. Every time Ryder moved, every glance he sent my way, it felt like the walls of the house were closing in. I busied myself with chores, wiping down counters, folding blankets that didn't need folding. Anything to distract myself from the storm brewing inside me. But Ryder wasn't making it easy. He followed me into the living room, sitting on the couch as I pretended to tidy up. "You don't have to keep cleaning, you know," he said, his voice light but laced with something I couldn't ignore. "I just like to keep busy," I replied without looking at him. He chuckled softly, and the sound sent a ripple of warmth through me. "You've always been like that," he said. I froze, my hand gripping the edge of the coffee table. "You don't know me that well," I said, turning to face him. "Maybe not," he replied, his eyes meeting mine. "But I want to." The way he looked at me then, steady, searching, unafraid, made my breath catch. I turned away, heading toward the kitchen, but I didn't make it far before I felt his presence behind me. "Maggie," he said softly, and I stopped. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. But I felt him step closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his body. "Don't," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to him or myself. "Don't what?" he asked, his voice low, almost teasing. I turned then, my heart pounding. "Don't look at me like that. Don't make this harder than it already is." His expression softened, but he didn't move away. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. It was the lightest of touches, but it sent a shockwave through me. "I'm not trying to make anything hard," he said. "But maybe we need to stop pretending." "Pretending what?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "That we don't feel this," he said, stepping closer. I should have stopped him. I should have said something. Anything to break the moment. But I didn't. Instead, I let him close the distance between us, his hand brushing my arm, his eyes locked on mine. "Ryder," I said, my voice trembling. He hesitated, his gaze searching mine for permission, or maybe forgiveness. "We can't," I whispered, but even as I said the words, my body betrayed me. I didn't step back. I didn't pull away. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice rough. I opened my mouth to say the words, but nothing came out. And then he kissed me. It was soft at first, hesitant, uncertain, but it quickly deepened. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and my arms wrapped around his neck before I could stop myself. Every rational thought in my head screamed at me to stop, to pull away, to end this before it went too far. But my body refused to listen. I lost myself in the feel of him, his warmth, his strength, the way his lips moved against mine like he'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard, our foreheads pressed together as the weight of what we'd just done settled between us. "This is wrong," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. "Then why does it feel so right?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. For the rest of the day, we danced around each other, our conversations strained, our movements careful. But the tension never eased. If anything, it grew stronger. That night, as the rain started up again, I found myself staring at him across the dining table, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on his face. We talked, but I barely heard his words. My mind was too busy replaying the kiss, every touch, every breath. And then he caught me staring. His eyes darkened, and he leaned forward slightly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I shook my head. "Nothing." "That's not true," he said, his voice low and steady. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. "I think I should go to bed." He stood when I did, following me to the hallway. I stopped outside my bedroom door, my hand on the knob, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. "Maggie," he said, and when I turned, he was closer than I expected, so close I could feel his breath on my skin. I didn't move as he reached out, his hand brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "We're not supposed to want this," I whispered. "I know," he replied. "But that doesn't change anything." His lips were on mine before I could respond, and this time, there was no hesitation. The storm outside grew louder, but inside I stopped fighting it. The night felt heavier than the storm outside. The air between us was thick, humming with something I couldn't define, but I knew it wasn't innocent. I lay stiffly in the bed, Ryder just inches away. My body betrayed me, leaning toward the heat of him, even as my mind screamed at me to keep my distance. His voice broke the silence. "Maggie, can I say something?" I turned my head slightly, afraid to meet his eyes. "What is it?" "I don't think I can keep pretending anymore." The words struck me like thunder. My pulse quickened, my breath catching in my throat. "Pretending what?" "That this, whatever this is, doesn't feel real." I rolled onto my side, facing him now, even though I knew it was dangerous. "It can't be real, Ryder. It can't be anything." He reached for my hand, his fingers brushing mine so lightly it sent shivers up my arm. "But it already is." I tried to pull away, but he held on, his grip gentle but firm. "I know this is wrong," he said, his voice raw, "but it doesn't feel that way when I'm with you." Tears welled in my eyes. I hated how much I wanted to believe him. "Ryder, you don't understand," I whispered. "Then help me understand," he pleaded. I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to say this was a mistake, a product of loneliness and circumstance. But when his hand moved to cup my cheek, my resolve crumbled. Before I could stop myself, I leaned into his touch, my lips parting as his thumb brushed against my skin. "This can't happen," I murmured, even as my body betrayed me, inching closer. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he closed the gap between us, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that shattered every wall I'd tried to build. It was desperate and deep, and I felt myself sinking into it, losing all sense of logic and control. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me against him, and for the first time in years I felt alive. But then it happened. A knock at the door. We froze, our breaths ragged, as the sound echoed through the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I pulled away, scrambling to sit up. Ryder looked as shaken as I felt, his eyes wide with panic. Who would be here this late?" I whispered. "I don't know," he said, already climbing out of bed. I followed him to the living room, my pulse racing as the knocking came again, louder this time. When I opened the door, my heart sank. It was Ryan, my ex-husband. "Maggie," he said, his eyes scanning me, taking in my disheveled appearance and the fact that I was clearly wearing someone else's sweatshirt. "What's going on?" I couldn't speak. My mind was blank, caught between guilt and terror. Then Ryder stepped into view, and Ryan's face hardened. "What the hell is he doing here?" Ryan demanded, his voice rising. His car broke down," I stammered. "He needed a place to stay." Ryan's eyes darted between us, suspicion darkening his features. "And you thought it was appropriate for him to stay here? In your house? In your bedroom?" "It's not what you think," I said quickly, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Ryan stepped closer, his voice sharp. "Do you have any idea how this looks, Maggie? He's family." "Not by blood," Ryder snapped, stepping between us. Ryan's eyes narrowed. "You need to leave. Now." "Ryan, stop," I said, but he wasn't listening. "No," he said, turning back to me. "I can't believe this. After everything we've been through. You throw it all away for him?" Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You don't get to judge me," I said, my voice shaking. "Not after what you did." Ryan flinched, but his anger didn't fade. "This is different, Maggie. This is disgusting." The words hit me like a slap. Ryder stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "You don't get to talk to her like that." Ryan turned on him. "And you, what kind of man does this to his family?" I couldn't take it anymore. "Stop," I shouted. The room fell silent. Ryan's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the hurt behind his anger. But I didn't care. Not anymore. "I think you should leave," I said, my voice steadier now. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Ryder turned to me, his expression uncertain. "Maggie." I held up a hand, stopping him. "I need a minute," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded and stepped back, giving me space as I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. The storm outside had passed, but inside, the damage had already been done. The door slammed shut, but the echo lingered, reverberating in my chest long after Ryan was gone. I sat there, staring at the floor, my hands trembling. Ryder stood a few feet away, silent, unsure whether to stay or leave. I wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize, to make sense of the chaos swirling in my head, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked at him. Really looked at him. His hair was still damp, his jaw tight, and his eyes held something I couldn't face right now. Regret? Desire? Fear? Maybe all of it. I'm sorry, he said softly, but it wasn't enough. This can't happen again, I whispered, though my voice betrayed me. It was shaky, uncertain, like I didn't even believe my own words. Maggie. I stood, putting distance between us. No, Ryder. We crossed a line. And now, my voice cracked, but I forced myself to continue. Now there's no going back. His jaw tensed, and he stepped closer. You're acting like this was a mistake. But it wasn't, not to me. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to sink into the warmth of his touch and forget everything outside this room. But reality was already seeping in, cold and unrelenting. We hurt people, I said. We hurt ourselves. He shook his head. No. We didn't plan this, Maggie. It just happened. I let out a bitter laugh. That doesn't make it okay. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, filled with everything we couldn't say. Then Ryder's voice broke through. I'll go. The words hit harder than I expected. My heart twisted painfully, but I didn't stop him. I just nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat as he turned and headed for the door. He paused, his hand on the knob. For what it's worth, I don't regret it, he said quietly. Not for a second. And then he was gone. The house felt colder after he left, the silence unbearable. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty mug in front of me. My hands still shook, my thoughts spinning in endless circles. I replayed every moment, every glance, every touch, every kiss. It had felt so right in the moment, but now it felt like a ticking bomb, counting down to an explosion I wasn't ready to face. Hours passed. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, but the storm inside me raged on. I thought about calling Ryder, telling him to come back, to hold me, to promise that this wasn't as wrong as it felt. But I didn't. Instead, I called Ryan. I didn't even know why. Maybe to apologize. Maybe to explain. But he didn't answer. His voicemail picked up, and the sound of his voice felt like a slap to the face. Ryan, it's me, I said, my voice shaking. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I'm sorry. I hung up before I could say anything else. The next morning was worse. I barely slept, and when I finally dragged myself out of bed, I looked like hell. My reflection in the mirror, messy hair, dark circles under my eyes, was a reminder of how far I'd fallen. I spent the day cleaning, trying to erase every trace of him. The mug he'd used, the sweatshirt he'd worn, the pillow where his head had rested. But it didn't work. By the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and texted him. Me, are you okay? It was a simple question, but my heart raced as I waited for his reply. It came minutes later. Ryder, I'm fine. Are you? Me, I don't know. There was a long pause before he responded. Ryder, I miss you. Tears welled in my eyes. I typed out a reply, but before I could hit send, my phone buzzed again. Ryder, I'll give you space if that's what you need. But if you need me, you know where to find me. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever before finally setting the phone down. I didn't know what I needed. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The days blurred together after Ryder left. The house felt too quiet, too still, like the walls themselves were pressing in on me. I couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. How one night had unraveled everything I thought I knew about myself. I spent hours replaying the moments in my head, wondering where it all went wrong. Was it the storm? The loneliness? Or had it been there all along? This need to feel wanted, to feel alive again? But no matter how I tried to justify it, the truth remained the same. I had crossed a line. I avoided Ryan's calls, letting them go to voicemail. I knew he deserved answers, but I wasn't ready to face him. How could I explain something I didn't even understand myself? As for Ryder, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he'd looked at me, like I was the only person in the world. The way he made me feel, wanted, needed, seen. It terrified me and thrilled me all at once. But it wasn't sustainable. It couldn't be. I told myself it was over, that it had to be. But then I saw him again. It was late, and I'd stepped outside to bring in the trash cans when I spotted him down the street, leaning against his car. Our eyes met, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. I should have turned away, gone inside, and locked the door. But instead I walked toward him. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, he said, running a hand through his hair. I had to see you. I swallowed hard, fighting back the emotions threatening to spill over. You can't keep doing this, Ryder. We can't keep doing this. I know, he said. But tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me you don't want this. Tears welled in my eyes as I shook my head. Wanting it doesn't make it right. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. Maybe not. But it's real. And I think that scares you more than anything. He wasn't wrong. But fear wasn't enough to justify what we'd done, or what we still wanted to do. I took a step back, my heart breaking as I spoke the words I knew he needed to hear. You need to go, Ryder. And this time, don't come back. His eyes searched mine, desperate for something I couldn't give him. But finally, he nodded and turned away. As I watched him drive off, the tears I'd been holding back finally fell. I didn't know if I'd made the right choice. All I knew was that choices like this came with consequences. Consequences I would have to carry alone. In the weeks that followed, I started rebuilding my home, my life, my sense of self. It wasn't easy. Some nights, I still lay awake, wondering what might have been. But I also knew that what happened had taught me something. Loneliness is dangerous. It can make you forget who you are and what you stand for. It can make you reach for something, someone you were never meant to have. But it also forces you to face yourself. I didn't regret Ryder, not entirely. He reminded me that I was still human, still capable of feeling. But he also reminded me of the cost of giving in to temptation. And that was a lesson I would never forget. What would you do if loneliness led you to cross a forbidden line? Could you walk away, or would you risk everything for a moment that felt undeniably real? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your side. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more shocking and emotional stories like this one. You won't believe what's coming next.